My daughter looked at the hotel bill of my husband's affair and calmly said, "I know, Mom. I've known for 5 years. An expert can tell a forgery by a single brushstroke, a misplaced pigment, a shadow that falls in the wrong direction. For 40 years, my life's work was to study the authentic, to understand the provenance of things, to trace their history back to the hands that made them. I could spot a lie under a century of dust and varnish. I just never thought I'd have to use that skill in my own marriage." The late September light, the color of weak tea, filtered through the bay windows of my study. Outside, the old maples that lined our Boston street were just beginning to surrender to autumn, their leaves blushing at the edges. Inside, the house was quiet, filled with the familiar, comforting sense of lemon oil and old paper. The only sound was the steady, sonorous tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that had measured out the peaceful decades of my life. Spread across the rich mahogany of my desk was a collection of family treasures, each one a testament to a life I believed to be genuine. My great-grandmother's silver locket, worn smooth by 100 years of touch. My father's fountain pen, its nib still faintly stained with ink. A tiny, porcelain thimble that belonged to my mother. I was curating a story, a tangible history, for my daughter, Chloe. My brilliant, sharp as a tack, Chloe was about to celebrate 20 years at her law firm. A milestone that made my heart swell with a fierce, maternal pride. She'd always been a minimalist, more interested in chrome and glass than in the gentle clutter of the past. But I was determined to give her something that mattered, something with weight. A box of our family's provenance. I picked up the locket, its surface reflecting the lamplight in a soft, milky glow. My thumb traced the intricate engraving of a swallow in flight, a symbol of a safe return home. I smiled, my mind drifting, and decided to call her. She answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and professional, the ambient noise of a busy office buzzing behind her. "Hi, Mom. Everything okay? I've only got a minute before a client call." "Everything is perfect, darling," I said, my voice warm. "I was just sitting here with your great-grandmother's locket and thinking of you. I'm putting together a little collection for your anniversary." There was a brief pause. "Oh, Mom, that's sweet. But you don't have to go to all that trouble. A gift card would be fine." "Really?" "It's not trouble. It's a joy," I insisted gently, trying to ignore the familiar, faint sting of her pragmatism. "These things have a soul, Chloe. They're part of your story." I know," she said, a little too quickly. "Look, I have to run. We'll talk this weekend? Love you." "I love you too, sweetheart," I murmured, but the line was already dead. I set the phone down, the silence of the room feeling suddenly heavier. It was just Chloe being Chloe, I told myself, focused, driven. She'd appreciate the gift when she saw it. My gaze drifted from the feminine delicacy of the heirlooms. The collection felt incomplete. It needed something from her father, a link to his side of the story. I thought of Richard's cufflinks, his first edition of The Great Gatsby. But then an image surfaced in my mind, his old cashmere coat, the one he'd bought in London decades ago, a beautiful navy blue coat he wore when he was still a globe-trotting architect, before he retired to a life of comfortable consultancy and tending his garden. It was a piece of his history, of his ambition and his prime. I went to the cedar closet upstairs, the air cool and aromatic. The coat was hanging in a garment bag at the very back. As I unzipped it, the fine wool felt impossibly soft under my fingers, still holding the faint, clean scent of cedar and a ghost of Richard's old cologne. I smiled, remembering the handsome, vibrant man who had worn it, my husband of 45 years, the architect of our life together. My fingers, moving out of professional habit, began their silent appraisal. I checked the silk lining for tears, the stitching on the buttons, the worn spots on the cuffs that told a story of its own. It was a beautifully made garment, authentic in every detail. My hand slipped into the deep inner breast pocket, expecting to find nothing more than a forgotten business card or a stray cough drop. Instead, my fingertips brushed against a piece of paper. It wasn't flimsy like a receipt from a drugstore. It was thick, expensive cardstock, folded into a neat square. A chill, completely unrelated to the temperature of the closet, traced a path down my spine. I pulled it out. It was a bill from a hotel. The crested letterhead read, Hotel Plaza Athénée, Paris. My breath hitched. Paris. Richard hadn't been to Paris in years. I unfolded the paper, my movements suddenly stiff. The bill was for a 5-night stay in a signature suite. It detailed room service charges, 2 glasses of champagne, oysters, a late-night dessert. The total was staggering. But it wasn't the number that made the blood drain from my face. It was the date, printed in crisp, clear type at the top. May 14th, 2019. May 2019. The date screamed in my mind. A siren in the quiet sanctuary of my home. No, that couldn't be right. In May of 2019, Richard was in Chicago for a week-long architectural symposium. I remembered it perfectly. I had helped him pack. I had driven him to Logan Airport. We'd spoken on the phone every night, his voice full of descriptions of the lectures and the dreary conference room sandwiches he was eating. My heart began a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. There had to be a mistake. A typo. An old bill mixed in with a new one. My appraiser's mind, the part of me trained to find rational explanations, scrambled for a foothold. But there was no explanation. I walked back down to my study, as if in a trance, the hotel bill clutched in my hand. The beautiful, meaningful heirlooms on my desk now seemed like props on a stage. I sat down and powered on my laptop, my fingers trembling slightly as I typed. I opened my digital photo albums, scrolling back to 2019. There it was. An album labeled Richard's Chicago Trip. The first photo was one I took of him in the hallway, smiling by his suitcase, the navy blue cashmere coat draped over his arm. The date on the photo was May 12th, 2019, 2 days before the date on the Parisian hotel bill. I stared at the screen, at the smiling face of the man I thought I knew. Every detail of that week, every conversation, every "I miss you" from a hotel in Chicago, replayed in my mind. But now, overlaid on those memories, was a new, horrifying detail. A detail that didn't fit the composition. A brushstroke of the wrong color. The cold, hard evidence of a forgery. I sat there in the encroaching darkness of the afternoon, the grandfather clock ticking off the seconds of my new reality. In one hand, I held the silver locket, a symbol of a long line of faithful love. In the other, I held the hotel bill, a symbol of a lie so profound it threatened to erase everything I held to be true. The patina of my 45-year marriage had been stripped away in an instant, and for the first time, I was terrified of what lay beneath. The grandfather clock chimed midnight, each bong echoing in the hollow space that had opened inside my chest. I didn't move from my desk. Sleep was an impossible luxury, a shore I couldn't reach. The house, my curated museum of a happy life, felt alien. Every framed photograph on the wall, every lovingly placed object on the mantelpiece, now seemed to mock me with its silence. An appraiser's first rule is to trust the evidence, not the story. And the story of my life had just been proven false by a single, damning piece of paper. But 1 piece of evidence is an anomaly, 2 is a coincidence, 3 is a pattern. My professional instincts, cold and sharp, cut through the fog of my burgeoning grief. Before I could allow myself to feel, I had to know the full extent of the forgery. I spent the dark hours of the night not as a wife, but as an investigator, the glow of the monitor painting my face in a sterile, blue light. My life was now an object for appraisal, and I would be ruthless in my assessment. I started with the finances. Our joint credit card statements, which I'd always left to Richard to manage, were a digital breadcrumb trail. I scrolled back to May 2019. My heart a cold stone in my chest. There it was, the charge from the Hotel Plaza Athénée. But it wasn't alone. Below it, a charge from a boutique called Charvet, a purveyor of fine men's shirts on the Place Vendôme. Another from a restaurant, L'Ambroisie, with a bill that suggested an intimate dinner for two. Then another, from a jewelry store on the Rue de la Paix. A woman's name, Isabelle Dubois, was on the authorized user list for a secondary card I never knew existed. The name was a key. With a detached, clinical precision, I typed it into a search engine. The first result was a professional profile. Isabelle Dubois, senior partner at an international architectural firm. A photograph showed a woman in her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a confident smile, standing on a construction site. A link led to her social media profile. It was private, but her profile picture was a candid shot of her laughing, a familiar bridge, and the distinctive rooftops of Paris blurred in the background. The photo was dated May 16, 2019. There it was, the pattern, the complete, irrefutable provenance of a lie. This wasn't a single, foolish mistake. This was a parallel life, meticulously constructed and carefully hidden behind the facade of business trips and conferences. The scale of it was masterful. The audacity, breathtaking. For a moment, a strange, cold admiration touched me. This was a forgery of the highest caliber. By the time the watery morning light began to seep into the study, I had my case file. Printouts lay neatly on my desk, the hotel bill, the credit card statements, Isabelle Dubois' professional headshot. I felt nothing. The shock had frozen me, encasing my heart in ice. I knew I couldn't confront Richard. Not yet. He was the artist of this deception. He would deny, deflect, and lie with the same charisma that had charmed me for 45 years. I needed an ally. I needed my daughter. My Chloe. I picked up the phone, my hand surprisingly steady. When she answered, I kept my voice even, betraying nothing of the chasm that had opened beneath my feet. Chloe, darling, I need you to come over. There's something important I need to discuss with you. Mom, I'm about to head into court, she said, her voice already strained with the day's business. Can it wait? No, I said. A single, unyielding word. It can't. The silence on the other end was heavy. She knew my tone. I didn't make demands. Okay, she said finally. I'll clear an hour. I'll be there by noon. I spent the next few hours in a daze, showering and dressing with automated movements. When the doorbell rang, I led Chloe into the living room, where I had arranged the printouts on the polished surface of the coffee table. The room, usually so warm and inviting, felt like a sterile boardroom, a space for a hostile takeover. What's all this, Mom? She asked, shrugging off her expensive trench coat. You look like you haven't slept. I didn't answer. I just gestured to the papers. Sit down, Chloe. She sat, a flicker of impatience in her eyes, and picked up the hotel bill. I watched her face, waiting for the flicker to turn into shock, for her jaw to tighten in anger, for the righteous fury of a daughter whose mother had been so profoundly wronged. I waited for her to look up at me, her eyes blazing, and say, "We are going to destroy him." But she didn't. She scanned the hotel bill, her expression unreadable. She glanced at the credit card statement, her eyes moving quickly over the Parisian charges. She looked at the picture of Isabelle Dubois, and a strange, weary resignation settled over her features. She looked not at me, but at the fireplace, and let out a long, slow sigh. It was not the sigh of shock. It was the sigh of someone burdened by a familiar, tiresome weight. So, she said, her voice unnervingly calm. You found out. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. My mind struggled to process them. You found out. Not. What is this? Not. This can't be real. It was a confirmation. What did you say? I whispered, my voice a dry rasp. Chloe finally turned to look at me, and her eyes were filled not with sympathy, but with a kind of pitying exhaustion, the look of a parent dealing with a difficult child. Mom, please, just listen. Let's not make this more dramatic than it needs to be. Dramatic. The word was a gasp of disbelief. Chloe, what are you talking about? Look at this. Your father. He had an affair. She pushed the papers aside with the back of her hand, a gesture of dismissal that sent a shard of ice through my heart. I know. Mom, she said, her voice level, almost gentle. It was the voice she used to calm a hysterical client. I've known for a while. The room tilted. The grandfather clock in the hall seemed to stop ticking. For a moment, I thought I had misheard, that the words were a phantom of my sleepless mind. You? What? I know, she repeated, her gaze unwavering. And I need you to try and be rational about this. A roaring sound filled my ears. I gripped the armrests of my chair, my knuckles white. How long? I managed to force the words out. How long have you known? Chloe hesitated, breaking eye contact for the first time. She smoothed a non-existent crease in her tailored slacks. About 5 years, she said quietly. 5 years. The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. 5 years, my daughter had watched me plan anniversary dinners. 5 years she had listened to me talk about the trips Richard and I would take in our retirement. 5 years she had sat at our Thanksgiving table, passing the turkey and the gravy, all while carrying this monumental, catastrophic secret. The deception wasn't just Richard's. It was hers, too. He told me when it happened, she continued, her lawyerly composure fully intact now, as if she were reciting facts in a deposition. He made a terrible mistake, and he was devastated. He was going to tell you, but I advised against it. What would have been the point? It would have destroyed you. It would have destroyed this family. The finances, the house, everything you've built. Was it worth throwing all that away over one stupid mistake? I stared at her, my daughter, the stranger sitting across from me. Her words were logical, pragmatic, and utterly devoid of a soul. She spoke of our family as if it were a business, a merger that needed to be protected from a bad quarterly report. She saw my heart not as something to be protected, but as a liability to be managed. You didn't protect me, I said, my voice shaking with a cold, rising fury. You made me a fool. You and him. You stood by and watched me live a lie. You helped him. All those times he worked late. All those conferences. Chloe stood up, pacing in front of the window. I helped him end it, she said defensively. I helped him manage the fallout. I did it for this family. For you. I chose the path that would cause the least amount of damage. I looked at the woman my daughter had become. So confident. So successful. So completely and utterly broken in a way I had never seen. She hadn't just covered up a lie, she had curated it. She had assessed the situation and decided that the original work, our marriage, our family, the truth was less valuable than the pristine, undamaged forgery. And in that moment, the pain of my husband's infidelity was suddenly and brutally eclipsed by the soul-crushing agony of my daughter's betrayal. He may have been the artist of the lie, but she, my own flesh and blood, had been its curator. And I was alone, truly and completely alone, in the ruins of the museum I once called home. After Chloe left, a profound and unnerving silence descended upon the house. It felt as though a bomb had been detonated, but one that made no sound, leaving behind only wreckage that was invisible to the naked eye. I walked through the familiar rooms of my home, touching the spines of books, adjusting a picture frame, my movements slow and deliberate. Every object was a lie. The smiling wedding photograph on the mantelpiece, a forgery. The collection of silver frames on the piano, charting our family's growth. A carefully curated exhibit of a life that never truly existed. I wasn't crying. The shock had burned past the point of tears, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. My daughter's betrayal had been the final, clarifying solvent, stripping away 45 years of varnish to reveal the rotten wood beneath. I sat in the living room, watching the light outside fade from gold to a bruised purple. And I waited. I was an appraiser, waiting for the seller to present a piece they claimed was an original masterpiece, all the while knowing it was a fake. I heard his key in the lock at precisely 6 o'clock. The sound so routine, it made the acid in my stomach churn. Richard came in humming, carrying a brown paper bag of groceries that smelled of fresh bread and rosemary. He was the very picture of the contented husband. Home from a day of gentle work. Evening. Ev, he said, placing the bag on the kitchen counter. He walked into the living room and paused, his smile faltering as he finally registered the atmosphere. What is it? You look 1,000 miles away. I didn't get up. I simply looked at him, my gaze level and unblinking. I know about Paris, I said. My voice was quiet, but the words cut through the domestic tranquility like shattering glass. I know about Isabel. I watched him closely, my appraiser's eye cataloging every detail of his reaction. For a single, unguarded second, I saw it, pure, unadulterated panic. His eyes widened. His skin seemed to tighten over his cheekbones. Then, just as quickly, the mask slid into place. The panic was replaced by a look of profound, sorrowful remorse. It was a masterful performance, but I could see the brushstrokes. He crossed the room and knelt before my chair, reaching for my hands. I pulled them back, placing them in my lap. Evelyn, he sighed, his voice a low, wounded murmur. My love, I am so sorry. I never wanted you to find out like this. I'm sorry it happened. A cold voice in my head noted. But, I'm sorry you found out. It meant nothing, he continued. His eyes, his beautiful, once honest blue eyes pleading with me. It was a moment of utter madness, a mistake that I have regretted every single day since. I remained silent, letting his words hang in the air like poison. My silence unnerved him. He needed me to cry, to scream, to give him an emotion he could manage. My stillness was a wall he couldn't scale. Please, he said, his voice cracking slightly. A nice touch. Don't look at me like that. Talk to me. Yell at me. Throw something. Say something. Who is she? I asked, my voice devoid of inflection. No one, he said dismissively. Just a colleague. It's over. It's been over for years. I ended it because I couldn't live with the lie. I couldn't bear betraying you. His phone buzzed on the end table. A sharp, intrusive sound. He glanced at it. The caller ID read Chloe. Of course. The co-conspirator, checking in on the performance. With a move that I realized was completely strategic. He answered it and put it on speakerphone. Dad, is everything okay? Chloe's voice was crisp, controlled. I was just calling to check on you both. We're talking, sweetheart, Richard said, his voice thick with manufactured pain. Mom. Chloe's voice softened, a perfect imitation of concern. Mom, please don't shut him out. I know you're hurt, but Dad loves you. He is committed to this family. We can get through this, together, if you just let us. There it was. We. Not you and Dad. We. The word was a branding iron, searing the truth of their alliance onto my heart. They stood together on one side of a chasm, and I stood utterly alone on the other. They weren't just managing Richard's affair, they were managing me. I was no longer a wife and a mother. I was a problem to be handled. a crisis to be contained. I looked from the phone to my husband's sorrowful face and felt something inside me snap. The ice around my heart didn't melt. It hardened into steel. "I want you to pack a bag," I said, my voice cutting through their carefully constructed drama. "I want you to leave. Tonight." Richard looked genuinely shocked, as if I'd suggested he set fire to the house. "What? Evelyn. No. Don't be ridiculous. I'm not abandoning you when you're like this. This is my home. We are going to work through this. Right here." It was a breathtaking power play, disguised as love and devotion. He would not cede control. He would stay here, in my space, and wear me down with his performance of regret until I simply gave up, too exhausted to fight. I saw the rest of my life spooling out in front of me, a quiet, elegant prison of politeness and unspoken truths, with my husband as my warden and my daughter as his deputy. I stood up. I didn't say another word. I walked out of the living room, leaving him there with our daughter's disembodied voice still murmuring from the phone. I went into my study and closed the door. The solid click of the latch, a small, satisfying sound. I sat at my desk, in my room, and picked up the receiver of my private line. I dialed the number of our financial advisor, a man I'd known for 30 years. David Albright's office. A polite secretary answered. "It's Evelyn Reed for David," I said. "It's urgent." A moment later, his warm, familiar voice came on the line. "Evelyn, what can I do for you?" I took a breath, my gaze falling on the printout of the Parisian hotel bill. My voice, when I spoke, was as calm and clear as a winter morning. "David, I need you to execute an order for me immediately. I want you to freeze all activity on the Reed Family Investment Trust. Effective right now. No withdrawals. No transfers. No liquidations. Nothing. It's to be locked down until further notice from me. And me alone." "Evelyn," he said, a note of confused concern in his voice. "Is everything all right? The trust requires both your and Richard's signatures for any changes." "Then, change the requirements," I said, my voice dropping lower, harder. "You and I both know that my inheritance was the seed money for that entire portfolio. Change it. I am revoking his access. Consider this my official, legally binding instruction." I hung up the phone before he could protest further. I sat for a moment in the silent study, the feeling of control, a strange, powerful current in my veins. Then, I stood and walked back into the living room. Richard was off the phone, standing by the mantelpiece, staring at our wedding photo. He turned as I entered, his face arranged into a mask of patient sorrow. "Evelyn, darling," he began. "Let's just calm down and talk about—" "I just got off the phone with David Albright," I interrupted, my voice cool and even. I watched as his expression shifted, the sorrow replaced by a flicker of confusion. "Your access to the trust has been frozen. In fact, all of our joint accounts are now under my sole authority." I let the words land. For the first time all evening, the performance stopped. The mask fell away, and I saw on his face an expression I had never seen before, pure, unadulterated shock. It was the look of a man who has just been ruthlessly outmaneuvered. He wasn't looking at his heartbroken wife anymore. He was looking at an adversary. "Your allowance," I said softly, "is cut off." He stared at me, speechless. The battle for my heart was over. I had just fired the first shot in the war for my life. The immediate aftermath of my financial strike was a deafening silence. Richard packed a single, expensive leather suitcase and left without another word, his face a mask of wounded pride. He didn't go to a friend's house or to his brother's. He checked into the Newbury, a luxury hotel overlooking the public garden. A move I knew was calculated to signal that, while I might control the trust, he was far from destitute. It was a strategic retreat, not a surrender. I knew. with the chilling certainty of an expert watching a chess master reset the board. That the next attack would come from a different direction. It began 2 days later. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A sharp, unwelcome intrusion into the quiet. It was a text from Chloe. "Mom, I've booked an initial family counseling session for us with Dr. Alistair Finch. Thursday at 4 p.m. He's the best in Boston. Please confirm you'll be there." It wasn't a question. It was a summons. She was reframing the narrative, casting our situation as a family crisis in which we were all equal participants. And I, presumably, was the one in most need of professional help. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen. Replying would be to engage on her terms, to tacitly agree that this was a problem to be mediated rather than a betrayal to be condemned. I set the phone down, face down, and ignored it. The next day, an email from Richard appeared in my inbox. The subject line was simply, "For us." The language was so full of therapeutic jargon, so unlike him, that I could almost see Chloe's manicured hands guiding his as he typed. He wrote of his journey of accountability, his desire to rebuild the trust that was broken, and his hope that I could find it in my heart to engage in a process of healing. He painted himself as the penitent, and me as the cold, unforgiving gatekeeper of that healing. It was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation, designed to make any rational anger on my part seem like an irrational barrier to progress. Later that afternoon, the doorbell rang. A delivery man stood on the porch with a ridiculously large bouquet of white lilies, my least favorite flower. They are funereal, with a cloying, heavy scent that always gave me a headache. The card, written in Richard's elegant script, read, "For our new beginning. All my love, R." The gesture was so perfectly, impersonally wrong that I almost had to laugh. It wasn't a peace offering, it was a prop. An exhibit for a case he was building against me. Exhibit A. The grieving husband extends an olive branch. I left the bouquet on the porch. The main assault, however, came that evening. The doorbell rang again, and this time it was my younger sister, Susan, her face etched with a look of profound concern, a homemade apple pie held in her hands like a shield. A wave of relief washed over me so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. Susan, my practical, sometimes flighty, but always loyal sister. She would understand. She would be my ally. "Oh, Evdad?" she said, bustling past me into the kitchen and setting the pie on the counter. I came as soon as I heard. "Chloe called me. She is worried sick about you." And I spoke to Richard. "He sounds utterly destroyed." Her opening words immediately set the frame, and a cold dread began to creep up my spine. I was not the victim of a betrayal. I was the cause of everyone's concern and heartbreak. I spent the next 20 minutes carefully and calmly laying out the facts, the 5-year affair, the hotel bills, Chloe's stunning confession of her complicity. I spoke with the detached precision of an appraiser presenting a report, hoping the sheer weight of the evidence would break through. Susan listened, her brow furrowed, nodding in all the right places. But when I finished, she didn't offer the outrage I so desperately needed. She offered platitudes. "Oh, Evelyn, it's just awful," she said, reaching across the table to pat my hand. "But 45 years, that's a lifetime. You can't just throw a lifetime away." He threw it away. "Susan, not me," I said, my voice tight. I know, but men can be such fools," she continued, as if reciting from a handbook on marital discord. "It was a mistake. A terrible one. But is it worth destroying everything? Think of the family, Evelyn. Think of the holidays. Think of what people will say." And there it was, the heart of her argument. Not my pain, not the deception, but the appearance of things. The potential for scandal, and cutting him off financially, she said. lowering her voice as if we might be overheard. Honey, that just seems so cruel. It's not like you. Chloe said she's worried you aren't thinking clearly, that the shock of it all has made you vindictive. I pulled my hand away. The pie on my counter, a symbol of sisterly comfort, now felt like a Trojan horse, sent by the enemy to breach my defenses. Susan wasn't here for me. She was an emissary, dispatched by Chloe to appeal to my sense of duty, my fear of conflict, my loyalty to the family image. She hadn't heard a word of my pain, she only heard the shattering of the comfortable, respectable facade we had all hidden behind for so long. Chloe is worried about the family trust, not my state of mind, I said, my voice as cold as the marble countertop. That's not fair. Evelyn, Susan said, her own voice rising defensively. She loves you. She just thinks you're making a rash decision that you'll regret. She said Richard is willing to do anything to fix this. You're the one who is refusing to even talk. I stood up from the table. The conversation over. My sister, my last hope for an anchor in this storm, had just handed me a stone instead. I think you should go. Susan, I said quietly. She looked at me, her eyes welling with tears of frustration and hurt. I don't understand you, Ev. I really don't, she said as she gathered her purse. At the door, she turned back, her face a mask of sorrowful appeal. Just think about what you're destroying. Please, before it's too late. The door clicked shut behind her, and the silence that flooded the room was a physical weight. It pressed down on me, suffocating me. I looked around at the beautiful, quiet rooms of my house, at the life I had so carefully built and authenticated. Their campaign was brilliant in its cruelty. It wasn't a direct assault, but a quiet, insidious erosion of my reality. For the first time since I found that receipt, a terrifying whisper of doubt slithered into my mind. Are they right? Am I being cruel? Am I the one destroying everything? The feeling of loneliness was absolute. I was an island, and the tide was rising. The silence Susan left behind was more corrosive than any argument. It was a silence filled with judgment, with the weight of her final life. Pleading words. Think about what you're destroying. I stood in the hallway, the scent of her apple pie still hanging faintly in the air, a sickly sweet reminder of her failed diplomacy. The doubt, once a whisper, was now a chorus in my mind. Vindictive, cruel, unforgiving. Was I that woman? Had 45 years of love and partnership rendered me incapable of seeing my own cruelty? I felt adrift, my moral compass spinning wildly. The house was no longer a fortress, it was the scene of the crime, and I was beginning to feel like the primary suspect. My phone lit up on the hall table. A text from Chloe. Susan told me you're not well. I'm coming over. Another command, not a question. She was on her way to administer another dose of her toxic concern. I looked at the phone, at the names in my contact list: my daughter, my husband, my sister, all of them now, adversarial. My fingers scrolled past them, past a lifetime of connections that now felt like a web, and landed on one name: Anya. I pressed the call button before I could lose my nerve. She answered on the first ring, her voice a warm, earthy rumble. Evelyn Reed, to what do I owe the honor? Did you finally decide to run away with me to Tuscany? A choked sound, half laugh, half sob, escaped my throat. Anya, I said, my voice breaking on her name. Can I come over? The humor vanished from her voice, replaced by a fierce, protective warmth. Don't move, she commanded. I'm coming to you. 20 minutes later, her little electric car zipped into my driveway. Anya Sharma swept into my house like a hurricane of sanity, her arms full of a grocery bag, her sharp, intelligent eyes taking in the entire scene. In a single glance, the untouched lilies on the porch, the pie on the counter, the look on my face. She was a retired sociology professor, but she had the diagnostic gaze of a seasoned detective. "Right," she said, unpacking the bag with brisk efficiency. "First, we get rid of the evidence." She picked up the pie and dumped it into the trash. She went to the front door, gathered the funereal lilies, and tossed them on top of the pie. "Second," she continued, pulling out a bottle of very good scotch and 2 glasses, "we hold a proper wake." I didn't speak for an hour. I sat at my kitchen table while Anya made me a cup of tea so strong it could dissolve steel, and I let the story pour out of me. The receipt, the 5 years, Chloe's clinical betrayal, Richard's performance, Susan's well-meaning, soul-crushing appeal to propriety. When I finally fell silent, my voice raw, the self-doubt returned. "Maybe she's right," I whispered. "Maybe I'm just destroying everything." Anya set her glass down with a definitive thud. "Don't you dare," she said, her voice sharp with an anger that was more fortifying than any expression of sympathy. "Don't you dare let those craven, manipulative people make you question your own sanity. This is a textbook case of psychological abuse. Evelyn. It's Darvo. Deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. It's what abusers do when they're caught." She leaned forward, her eyes blazing with intellectual fire. "Richard is the offender, but he and Chloe are painting you as the attacker. They deny the severity of the betrayal. They attack your character by calling you cruel and vindictive, and they reverse the roles, making themselves the victims of your irrational behavior. It's a strategy, my dear, a well-documented patriarchal script as old as time." The words, so clinical and so precise, were like a splash of cold water. She wasn't just offering a shoulder to cry on, she was handing me a shield and a sword. She was giving me the language for my own experience. "And your sister," she went on, her voice softening slightly, "is a different case. Susan isn't malicious, she's a textbook enabler. She's terrified of social disruption. Her entire identity is built on the idea of the nice, respectable family. Your pain is an inconvenient truth that threatens her worldview, so she's asking you to bury it for her own comfort." It was all so clear. Anya hadn't just validated my feelings, she had authenticated my reality. My anger wasn't a flaw, it was a legitimate response to a coordinated attack. But was it all a lie? I asked, the question that had been haunting me. All of it? The whole 45 years? Anya looked at me gently. Was it? Evelyn, you're the appraiser. What was the authentic piece they built this forgery on top of? I closed my eyes, and the sterile, silent house around me dissolved. The scent of scotch and tea faded, replaced by the smell of damp plaster and rain. The scene shifts. It's 1978. A tiny, third-floor apartment in the North End, the windows streaked with rain. A much younger Evelyn is sitting on a paint-splattered floor next to a 20-something Richard. He's thin. His hair is too long, and his eyes are alight with a passion that seems to generate its own heat. Spread around them are huge rolls of architectural blueprints. He's tracing the lines of a house with his finger. A small, modern home that seems impossibly grand. "The light will come in from the east, right here," he says, his voice full of excitement. "So, you'll have the sun in your studio every morning." My studio. He'd designed a whole room for my work. Back when my work was a messy hobby, and my collection was a few chipped pieces of pottery I'd bought at flea markets. I trace the lines with him, our fingers meeting. He looks up from the plans, his gaze meeting mine. His smile is open, guileless, and utterly real. "None of these lines mean anything if you're not at the end of them. Ev," he says. "It's just an empty box without you." I opened my eyes, the kitchen coming back into focus. A single tear traced a path down my cheek. The first I'd shed not of confusion, but of pure, unadulterated grief for what was lost. "No," I said to Anya, my voice clear and steady. "It wasn't always a lie. The original was authentic. A sad, bitter smile touched my lips. And that's the real tragedy, isn't it? A common forgery is just a cheap imitation. But to take a genuine masterpiece and paint over it until it's unrecognizable, that's the greatest desecration of all. In that moment, the doubt vanished, burned away by the clean fire of truth. My pain was real because the love had been real. My anger was justified because the desecration was profound. I was not the destroyer of my family. I was the curator of its history, and I would no longer stand by and allow its most important truth, my own, to be painted over. I looked at Anya, my oldest, dearest friend, and I felt a strength I hadn't felt in days. The siege was over. I was ready to plan my counterattack. In the week that followed my meeting with Anya, a fragile peace settled over me. It was the calm of a general in her command tent after the battle lines have been drawn. The doubt was gone, replaced by a quiet, methodical resolve. I spent my days performing a kind of domestic archaeology, sifting through the layers of my life with Richard and systematically untangling them. I opened a new bank account in my name only. I changed the passwords on our utilities and household accounts. I went through old files, separating my financial history from his. Each small act was a reclamation, a quiet declaration of independence. I ignored the constant barrage of digital noise from Chloe and Richard. Her texts became more demanding, his emails more saccharine and pleading. I archived them all without reply. My silence, I knew, was more unnerving to them than any angry tirade. I was no longer a participant in their drama. I was an unmovable, silent observer, and it was driving them mad. I believed, foolishly, that they would eventually exhaust themselves and retreat. I had forgotten that my daughter was a lawyer, trained in the art of relentless, escalating warfare. The next attack was not a text or a phone call. It was delivered by a bicycle courier on a Tuesday morning. He handed me a thick, cream-colored envelope bearing the embossed logo of Chloe's prestigious law firm. It felt cold and heavy in my hand. This was not a personal letter. This was an official act. I took it to my study and slid it open with the antique letter opener from my desk. Inside was not a handwritten note, but several pages of dense, numbered paragraphs, typed in a severe Times New Roman font. The document was titled, Letter of Formal Concern Regarding the Management and Preservation of Real Property at 14 Turn Lane, Chatham, Ma. My breath caught in my throat. Turn Lane, our house on the Cape. I sat down, my hands suddenly unsteady, and forced myself to read the cold, legal prose. It was drafted by a senior partner at Chloe's firm, a man I'd met once at a Christmas party. The letter stated that their client, Ms. Chloe Reed, as a direct heir and concerned party, had reason to believe that the primary owner, Mrs. Now Self, Evelyn Reed, was exhibiting behavior indicative of profound emotional distress and impaired judgment. It cited my abrupt and punitive financial decisions and my refusal to engage in conciliatory communication as evidence. The words blurred. I felt a wave of dizziness. Then the final, brutal paragraph came into focus. It stated that Ms. Reed felt a fiduciary duty to protect this significant family asset. Therefore, she strongly advised that I enter into a co-management agreement, effective immediately, which would grant her joint legal authority over the property. The letter concluded by stating that if I refused, Ms. Reed would be left with no alternative but to petition the Suffolk Probate and Family Court to appoint an independent conservator to oversee the asset, pending a formal evaluation of Mrs. Reed's emotional and cognitive competence. The letter fell from my fingers onto the desk. A conservatorship, impaired judgment. They were coming for my mind again. But this time, their target was the most sacred place I had. The house on the Cape wasn't just a house. It was the one, true, authentic masterpiece of our family. It was the smell of salt and beach roses, the sound of the screen door slamming on a summer afternoon, the feel of sun-warmed pine floorboards under bare feet. It was Chloe, age 5, her face smeared with chocolate ice cream, proudly holding up a seashell. It was Richard, young and strong, teaching her how to sail in the choppy waters of the bay. It was the repository of every genuine memory, every moment of uncomplicated happiness we had ever shared. It was the only part of our history I still believed to be real. And now my daughter was threatening to seize it, to desecrate it by using it as a weapon against me. A white-hot rage, pure and clean, burned through the fear. I snatched up my phone and dialed Chloe's number. She answered immediately, as if she'd been waiting for my call. Her voice was cool and detached. "I assume you received the letter," she said. "How dare you?" The words were a low, guttural snarl. "How dare you bring that house, our house, into this filth?" "I'm protecting a family asset, Mom," she replied, her voice the epitome of legal reason. "You're not acting rationally. You're making vindictive, emotional decisions. That house has been in this family for 3 generations. I have a duty to preserve it from your current instability." A duty. I laughed. A harsh, my hand trembling with so much rage I could barely press the button. She would burn down our entire history to get what she wanted. I immediately called Anya. My voice shook as I read the legal jargon aloud. When I finished, there was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then, Anya let out a low, dangerous whistle. "The little viper," she breathed. "My God. Evelyn. She is actually using the law as a weapon of terror against her own mother. Can she do it?" "Anya," I asked, the fear finally breaking through my anger. "Can a judge actually take my house away from me because my daughter says I'm upset?" "It's a bluff," Anya said, her voice firm and reassuring. "A vicious, evil bluff, but a bluff. It's incredibly hard to prove someone is incompetent. But she's not playing to win in court, Ev. She's playing to break you before you even get there. She's betting the fear, the shame, the sheer horror of having your stability questioned in public will be enough to make you surrender everything." I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet, respectable street. I thought of the little saltbox cottage on the Cape, of the sound of the foghorn at night, of my daughter's laughter echoing over the dunes. They had come for my marriage with lies. They had come for my sanity with manipulation. And now, they had come for my memories with legal threats. There was nothing left to take. There was no more ground to retreat to. The fear was real. A cold, metallic taste in my mouth. But as I stood there, a new feeling rose up to meet it. A feeling so powerful it pushed the fear aside. An iron-clad, unyielding determination. They had made a critical error in their appraisal of me. They thought I was a fragile antique, easily broken. They were about to find out I was made of stone. "No," I said into the phone, my voice low and steady, the tremor completely gone. "She's not going to break me." I looked at the threatening letter on my desk, a fraudulent claim against the provenance of my very soul. "She's not just going to lose, Anya. She's going to find out what it feels like to be expertly and publicly deconstructed." My counterattack was not a letter or a lawsuit. It was silence. And in that silence, I planned. Chloe's legal threat was a chess move designed to terrify me into submission. But Anya was right. It was a gambit, an overreach. I had my own lawyer, a sharp, sensible woman Anya recommended, who confirmed the threat was 99% intimidation. Armed with that knowledge, I did the one thing they never expected. I did nothing. I simply waited. Their desperation grew with each passing day. It culminated in an announcement, delivered by Chloe via an email sent to our entire extended family and social circle. They would be hosting a grand party at the house to celebrate Richard's 70th birthday. It was a masterstroke of psychological warfare, a move so audacious it was almost brilliant. The theme was to be a celebration of family and a lifetime of love. It was designed to do 2 things. force me into a public performance of the happy too forgiving wife, and if I refused, to paint me as the unstable recluse who wouldn't even celebrate her own husband. Anya was furious. You can't let them do this, it's an invasion. No. I told her, a strange, icy calm settling over me. It's a stage, and every performance needs a final act. The day of the party, my home was transformed into a theater of lies. Caterers bustled through my kitchen, arranging trays of canapés I hadn't chosen. A string quartet played softly in the corner of a living room that felt like a stranger's. Chloe was magnificent in her role as director, a vision in a silk dress, her smile as bright and hard as a diamond. Richard, the leading man, was the very picture of the beloved patriarch, accepting congratulations with a practiced, humble charm. They both watched me, their eyes holding a glint of triumphant warning. I was to play my part, or there would be consequences. I moved through the crowd of familiar faces, accepting kisses on the cheek and compliments on how lovely the house looked. My sister, Susan, hovered near me, her face a mess of anxiety. You look beautiful. Ev, she whispered. Let's just try to have a nice evening, for everyone's sake. She was still pleading for the preservation of the facade. Anya was my silent shadow, a reassuring presence at my back, her eyes missing nothing. Finally, the moment came. Chloe tapped a crystal glass with a spoon, the clear, high note silencing the room. She raised her glass. To my father, she began, her voice resonating with warmth and affection. A man of integrity, talent, and above all, a boundless love for his family. He has been my mentor, my hero, and the greatest man I know. Happy birthday, Dad. The room erupted in applause. Richard stood, beaming, and took the floor. He thanked everyone, told a charming, self-deprecating anecdote, and then he turned his gaze on me. And I must thank my beautiful wife, Evelyn, he said, his voice thick with emotion. My rock for 45 years. Her strength, her wisdom, and her capacity for forgiveness. They continue to be the great marvel of my life. I love you, darling. A fresh wave of applause washed through the room. Guests smiled at me, some with tears in their eyes. The hypocrisy was a physical force, so dense I could barely breathe. This was their checkmate. In this room, in front of these people, I was cornered. As the applause died down, I stood up, a serene smile on my face. Thank you, Richard. That was beautifully said, I said, my voice carrying easily through the silent room. A collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through my family. I was playing my part. And since this is a day for celebrating you and your history, I have a small gift as well. A sort of retrospective. I walked to a side table where a single, elegantly wrapped gift box sat. It was flat and square, wrapped in heavy, charcoal gray paper with a simple silver ribbon. I picked it up and walked to where Richard stood, handing it to him. He took it, his smile fixed, but his eyes were filled with a sudden, wary confusion. Evelyn, you shouldn't have, he murmured. Oh, but I should, I said. Please, open it. In front of everyone. He pulled the ribbon and tore away the paper. He lifted the lid of the box. I watched his face as his eyes registered the contents. The color drained from his skin. His charming smile dissolved into a slack-jawed mask of horror. Inside the box, mounted on a field of black velvet like a museum exhibit, was my evidence. In the center, the crisp bill from the Hotel Plaza Athénée. To its left, the credit card statement, with the charges from Parisian jewelers and restaurants circled in damning red ink. To its right, a professionally printed 8x10 photograph of Isabelle Dubois, laughing in the Parisian sun. And below it all, the final piece, a copy of the cold, threatening legal letter from Chloe's firm concerning my impaired judgment and the seizure of our home on the Cape. As he stared, paralyzed, I turned to address my silent, captive audience. My voice was not angry or hysterical. It was the calm, a measured tone of a curator presenting her findings. For his 70th birthday, I wanted to honor Richard's incredible talent for architecture. I began. His passion for building intricate, impressive structures. For the last 5 years, it seems he has been building a stunningly elaborate second life, with a beautiful office in Paris. A series of confused gasps rippled through the room. Richard looked up, his eyes wide with panic. Of course, I continued, my gaze sweeping over the crowd before landing on my daughter. A master architect can't manage a complex international project alone. He needs a brilliant project manager, someone to handle the difficult logistics, to manage communications, and above all, to ensure the facade back home remains flawless. For that role, Richard was lucky enough to have our daughter. I let the words hang in the air for a moment. Then I looked directly at Chloe, whose face had gone chalk white. She is known for 5 years. She kept his secrets, enabled his travels, and advised him on how best to manage his mistake. The performance of this perfect family you see tonight, that was her production. The shock in the room was now absolute. All eyes swiveled from me to Chloe, who stood frozen in a spotlight of her own making. My sister Susan stared at her niece, her mouth agape, a look of dawning, horrified comprehension on her face. But even the best-laid plans can fail, I said, my voice dropping slightly. When I discovered this masterful forgery and decided I would no longer fund it with my money, my trust, or my silence, a new design was required. I gestured to the letter in the box Richard was still holding, as if it were a venomous snake. That is their final masterpiece. A legal threat to have me declared mentally incompetent and strip me of our family home. The last piece of authentic history I have left. The silence that followed was profound. It was the silence of a world shattered. The string quartet was silent. The caterers were still. Every guest stood like a statue. The entire, beautiful lie had been deconstructed, piece by piece, in front of everyone they had ever wanted to impress. I looked at my husband, a broken man holding the evidence of his own ruin. I looked at my daughter, exposed and humiliated. Finally, I walked to the grand mahogany table in the center of the room and placed my house key gently upon its polished surface. The party is over, I said, my voice soft but final. Richard, Chloe, the house is yours. I've discovered I no longer have any taste for forgeries. I turned and walked toward the door, where Anya was waiting, her car keys already in her hand. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I walked out of the house, out of the performance, and into the cool, clean air of the night, leaving them all behind in the beautiful, silent ruins of the truth. 6 months after the party, the world looked different, sharper, brighter. I stood in my new apartment, a minimalist space of glass and steel perched high above the Boston skyline, and watched the morning sun glint off the Charles River. The air smelled not of old wood and lemon oil, but of fresh coffee from the sleek espresso machine on my new quartz countertop. There were no ghosts here, no heirlooms whispering stories of a life that wasn't mine. The walls were white and mostly bare, waiting for a new collection, a new history, to be written upon them. The fallout from that night had been less of a bang and more of a quiet, final collapse. The divorce was swift and bloodless, stripped of their public facade and the moral high ground they had so arrogantly occupied. Richard and Chloe had no fight left in them. They were suddenly notorious, the subjects of whispers in the very social circles they had prized so highly. I sold the house on the quiet street, the beautiful, suffocating museum of my marriage, and had my lawyer wire Richard his exact legal share. Not a penny more. He took it and, I heard through the grapevine, moved to a condo in Florida, a place I'm sure he considers a paradise for the newly single. There has been an impenetrable wall of silence from Chloe. I have not seen her or spoken to her since that night. She has not called. She has not written. Her silence is, perhaps, the only honest thing she has ever given me. My sister, Susan, has sent a series of long, rambling letters, filled with tears, apologies, and a desperate desire for forgiveness. I have read them, and I have put them away in a drawer. Forgiveness, I am learning, is a quiet, personal curation, not a performance for the benefit of others. My friendship with Anya, however, has become the foundational masterpiece of my new collection. She came over that morning, as she did most mornings, letting herself in with her own key and heading straight for the coffee. "There's a new exhibit at the MFA," she announced, handing me a mug. "Dutch masters, all gloom and stormy seas. I thought we could go. It seems appropriate for your dark and vindictive phase." I laughed. A real, easy laugh that echoed in the sunlit space. "I think I'm moving into my impressionist phase. Thank you very much," I said. "More light, less brooding." "Good," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Brooding is so bad for the skin." Our conversation was like this now, light and forward-looking. We had already dissected the past, analyzed its every flaw and fracture. Now, we spoke only of the future. She settled onto a stool at the kitchen island, watching as I sat down at my laptop. On the screen was a travel website, displaying a picture of a charming, sun-dappled Parisian street. Anya raised an eyebrow. "Paris?" she asked, her voice gentle, without a trace of judgment. "Are you sure?" I looked at the image, at the city that had been the silent, unknowing accomplice to my life's greatest deception. For months after the party, the very name had been a source of pain, a stolen artifact in the museum of my mind. It was a place he had tainted, a masterpiece he had defaced with his lies. "I'm sure," I said, a sense of calm certainty settling over me. I've spent my entire life appraising the value of things based on their history, on their provenance. And for the last 6 months, the provenance of Paris has been tied to him, to her, to a lie. I turned the laptop so she could see. "I'm going alone. For 2 weeks. I'm going to walk through the Louvre until my feet ache. I'm going to eat pastries in a different patisserie every morning. I'm going to sit by the Seine and read a book from cover to cover. I am going to give that city a new history, a new provenance, one that begins and ends with me." Anya smiled, a slow, beautiful smile of pure pride. "Well," she said, "it's about damn time you curated your own damn trip." After she left, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the sprawling, intricate map of the city below. I thought of the Japanese art of kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with lacquer mixed with powdered gold. The philosophy is that the piece is more beautiful for having been broken, that the cracks are a part of its history, not something to be hidden. My life was not a pristine, unbroken vessel. The cracks were there, the lines of betrayal, the fractures of grief. But they were no longer gaping wounds. I had filled them not with bitterness or regret, but with the gold of my own strength, the quiet victory of my freedom. The composition of my life was new. It was stronger at the broken places, and infinitely more valuable because its story, its true story, was finally on display. My name is Evelyn Reed. I am 68 years old, and for the first time in my life, I am the sole, undisputed authenticator of my own worth. I am no longer just an appraiser of art. I am the artist of my own life. I turned back to my laptop, took a sip of my coffee, and with a single, steady click of the mouse, I bought my ticket. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. Not of triumph, not of revenge, but of a peace so profound it felt like coming home to a place I'd never been before. If you were moved by my journey, you can support me by sharing this story, allowing others to find strength in the truth. Thank you for listening. And you, what would you do in my place? I would be honored to hear your thoughts, so please share them with me in the comments below. I am always curious to know what you think. Let me know where in the world you are hearing this story from. For more life stories like this one, remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Many more stories are waiting to be told. With my heartfelt thanks. Until next time.